Okay, so the important things to take is that from the time your kid wakes up every morning to the time they go to sleep, their day is scheduled to be a professional athlete. Okay, so today, what I want to talk about is training your kids for sports. And one of the reasons I want to do this because a lot of my siblings now are having a bunch of little kids, and I thought it'd be interesting. Since I got out of the hospital and over the past couple of years, I've done a lot of reading on this topic about how to make yourself more athletic. And I do Olympic weightlifting and various sports, and I grew up with sports, so I thought it'd be interesting to do kind of a deep dive into this topic. So, how can you train your kids to make them the most athletic possible? And that's what we're going to look at today. Okay, so the big secret is that strength, and a lot of people don't think about this. They think, big muscles, Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's strong. But the vast majority of strength is your neural system, so your nervous system. You'll notice this with anyone who's never trained before. If you get them to start lifting weights in a month, they'll be able to lift 20, 30 more kilos, 50 pounds, and a lot of weights. And this isn't because their muscles are getting so much bigger in the first month. It's because the nervous system's getting better and better at triggering those muscles. So what it boils down to is that essentially before puberty, the nervous system is the main driver of strength. And what you want to do is up until puberty, you want to train the nervous system to make it more efficient, better at firing the muscle fibers so that ways that we're going to train, they determine things like how fast you can sprint, how high you can jump, how well you can coordinate your body, and even how quickly you can react to under pressure in situations in sports. So this really is sort of the ages from 0 to 12. That's a critical phase. And sure, when puberty comes along, it's going to flood the body with hormones, with testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1. But these are only going to build muscle, and they're going to build it on top of that the neural foundation that you built over those first 12 years. So today we're going to look at what do we need to do. If you're a parent out there, or some of my siblings, they've got kids, what would they do to maximize that child's potential in sports? Now, one thing I do want to say, which is a caveat here, most professional athletes, it's all going to be determined by your genetics. Someone who's not, at least 190 centimeters tall or about 6'2" or 3" is probably never going to play in a lot of professional basketball or something, right? They're just not going to have the genetics for it. And if you look at 100-meter sprinters, same thing. Still, everyone has their own maximal potential. And this kind of outline I want to give today is going to, kind of designed to maximize that child or that person's potential, and by laying the neural foundation, for athletics for the rest of their life. Something to think about here is, I'm sure you notice people who try to learn a language or something, after childhood, they always have an accent or have difficulties, to speak the language. And and if you think about it, the nervous system, the brain that is responsible for coordinating language, is also the same system that's responsible for sports and athletics. So again, if you don't lay this foundation correctly, you'll never be able to reach your full potential throughout the rest of your life. So let's look into it and start with the ages of 0 to 5. What should you be doing then? Okay, so from the ages of 0 to 5, right around that age group, for the first 5 years, it's really all about movement exploration, for learning to move and coordinate the body in very basic ways. So during this time, a lot of free play. You want to make sure your kids are outside, running around, climbing trees, running, jumping, crawling, wrestling with them. That they're learning all these just fundamental basic movements. Other things you'd want your kids to do at this time would be sports that really help them learn their own body and learn to control their own body. So things like gymnastics. Also, swimming is very interesting because it puts them in a totally different environment and develops the neural system in a very just sort of distinct coordinative way, as opposed to just running around the yard. And then there's so swimming, gymnastics, free play outside. And then also sort of dancing would, I think, be very beneficial because it's, you're learning to coordinate your body movements to sounds, to cues. At this time, you don't want to be overthinking it. You just want to be getting them to expose to lots of movements so that their body, they're comfortable climbing or running or swimming or, doing cartwheels, that sort of thing. So now that you've got sort of the base movement patterns in place, you're going to want to start refining those. So from the ages of like 5 to 8, now we're trying to start actually developing coordination, agility, and reaction time in a more structured way. So during these ages, you might start putting your kids in things like basketball or soccer, sports that really train eye-hand coordination or foot coordination, and all the subtle movements of those sports like spinning, doing footwork on a basketball court. You'd also might want to put them in something that requires them to not only coordinate their own body, but but to adjust and change with other bodies like judo or jiu-jitsu or wrestling. Uh, and then finally, at this stage, you can also start on getting them to try to actually learn to control their nervous system in some way. So to get a high degree of output, of explosive output. So this would also be the ages where you could start putting them in something like track and field events. So, sprinting the 60 meters, 100 meters, getting high jump, those types of things. Because now you can slowly start introducing this ability that you need, which is to be able to fire and recruit a lot of neurons simultaneously. So that's sort of the ages of 5 through 8. You can start putting them in like organized sports. But I would recommend those, like I said, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, something where you're controlling your body and also learning how to interact with other people. Soccer and basketball have lots of skilled movements involved, not only for the feet, but the hands, the eyes. There's a lot of coordination, split reaction timing that's required. And at that age, they're not really jumping high enough or running fast enough to really get injured. And then finally, track and field sports, where you can start training the nervous system to really be explosive. So, from the ages of 0 to 5, they've been playing outside. They learned to climb and jump and play around. From 5 to 8, they started, getting introduced to sort of organized team sports. Got where they can, learn wrestling movements. They're able to sprint now, maybe jump high and control their muscles in ways like coordinated muscle movements. Dribbling a basketball, doing spin moves, that kind of thing. And from 9 to 12 is where it starts getting really fun, because this is where you can really lay the groundwork, which is going to make it so that when puberty hits, you get an explosion in capability. And so now, you've added in some sports, like I said, some track and field they're doing. And at this point, you can start adding in sort of actual strength training exercises. So things like body weight, push-ups and pull-ups, chin-ups, those type of exercises, focusing on the technique and strict form. And really, you're not trying to get high repetitions or heavy weight here. You're just trying to make sure, okay, they're building up some level of strength, and they're also learning how to control and coordinate their body. You can also do plyometrics at this stage. So plyometrics would be, jumps or short sprints. And then I also think this is the stage where you could add in sort of fundamental barbell lifts or Olympic weightlifting. At this point, though, you're not really doing a lot of heavy weight because, before puberty, you're not going to be really growing muscle anyway. So like we've been talking about, really all your training is the nervous system here. And what you want to do is really focus on technique, so they can do overhead barbell squats with perfect technique, going deep into a full squat, regular squats, push press, snatches, clean and jerks, all these type of movements that are very complicated, take years for people to master. You can start doing them at 9 to 12, and you'll have a huge advantage over all the people who start way later in life, but you're adding all of this in also on top of, the sports and regular sports they're doing. You definitely don't want to be focusing in these ages on doing one specific sport, just one movement pattern all the time. You're still trying to build a very broad base. But from 9 to 12, you're starting to focus on, okay, now I can recruit a lot of muscles. I can be very explosive. I can carry out these complicated movement patterns quickly, efficiently, and well. One thing I want to note here about plyometrics, because most people do this wrong, is that if you're doing more than, 2 or 3, max 5 jumps in some kind of plyometric exercise, you're doing it wrong. Because the whole idea of a plyometric is to train your rate of force development, which is how many muscle fibers you can recruit and how explosive you can be. And if you start doing beyond 4 or 5 reps with that, you're really training your body for something else. You're training it to, be able to continue to jump after it's already exhausted. But you're not training that maximal rate of force that you can create, because your body's just getting too tired. Your nervous system's not able to trigger muscle fibers as well. Just a note on plyometrics, most people do it wrong. If you see someone saying they're jumping 20 times, they're not training their max vertical jump. And what you're trying to do with plyometrics is train your ability, your maximum ability. So maximal vertical jump, maximum velocity in terms of sprint. Okay, so if you want your kid to be a professional athlete, the best thing you can do is make sure you have good genetics and the person you marry has good genetics, because that is by far and away the biggest factor that's going to make your kid a professional athlete or not. Let's say you've done that. Let's say, you played college ball and you married someone who's, very big, tall, athletic. Maybe they play college sports as well. And you want to, your kids do better than you did, and you want them to be professional athletes. Well, a lot of it's going to depend on their anthropometry, which is sort of the dimensions of their body, how it's built, in terms of what sports they're going to naturally be best at. So I would say, again, not a lot changes. From 0 to 5, you're still going to be building that foundational movement patterns. From 5 to 8, you're going to want to introduce even more diverse movement patterns where the kid is learning how to actually control a lot of their movement. So they're doing actually track and field sports, they're wrestling, they're doing gymnastics. Maybe they're doing some organized team sports as well, like basketball or soccer, to build a very broad base. And then from 9 to 12, you're going to start, doing even more like specific drills, Olympic weightlifting, again, light weights, focusing on technique, actually doing 60-meter, 100-meter sprints, training plyometrics, those types of things. And then right before puberty, you'll be able to, you've seen them grow out, you've seen them hit, what kind of body proportions they have. And then you can do some basic tests. So the standing vertical jump test is pretty straightforward. Whatever you can do in 100 meters at about 12 or 13, if it's not under 11 seconds, you're never going to be a Olympic 100-meter sprinter. It's just not going to happen. The same thing for the standing vertical jump. If you want to be you can measure again right before puberty. And the nervous system at this time is kind of, it's like learning a language. It still can grow some after that, but the vast majority of it's already closed off. And so what you can do is some basic tests right there, and you can see what sports they're going to be able to do and what they're not going to be able to do. And then once you hit puberty, that's where I think you would start focusing more on the sport that you want to be a professional in, where you think, okay, my anthropometry, the dimensions of my body or of your child are the best for that particular sport. So for instance, a lot of people with very long torsos and short legs, maybe even in short arms, they are very good at Olympic weightlifting because they don't have to, usually can stand very vertical and very upright when they lift the weights. And so instead of, being a very tall, lanky person who has to bend over a lot under the weight coming down on their shoulders, they can actually stand up, they can do a squat almost perfectly upright. You'll see this with a lot of Chinese weightlifters. So those are the things you're going to be looking at based on anthropometry. Then you could, and some basic test measurements, what is the vertical jump? How do they run 100 meters? You could put them in the sports so their bodies and their genetics are best for. And then you would train that until, 18. And that's about, and focus more on that particular specific sport. And that's kind of the best you can do, the best you can hope for. Again, though, genetics is almost everything. When you look at the 100-meter sprinters, there's a reason they're almost all from a very specific, all their genetics basically come from one specific region in West Africa. That the marathon winners also come from a very specific region in Ethiopia or Eastern Africa. And that's because the genetics of those peoples have the tendons, the femur links, the exact anthropometry that is perfectly designed for those sports. And so when there's only 100 people in the world, and the difference between running a tenth of a second faster makes you the greatest in the world versus Platt's thousandth place, then those tiny genetic differences make a huge difference. And it's the difference between Usain Bolt and the guy you never heard of. But like I said, that would be sort of the outline to take if you want your kid to have the best shot it could possibly have at a professional sports career. And I think that everyone should remember is that, there's a lot of things I could say about this, but mainly it needs to be fun and enjoyable. Otherwise, your kid or yourself or everyone's just going to reject it, right? So, this might seem like a tangent, but, if there was one pill that they could give you to reduce all-cause mortality and increase your health span, which is the amount of time you live your whole life where you're healthy, it would be a pill that contained all the effects that are the beneficial effects that are given by exercise, right? So there's been tons of studies on this for just about any disease, from cancer, heart attack to anything. People that do sports and are active more regularly, whether it's lifting weights or riding a bike or running or whatever it is, live longer, healthier lives than people who don't, right? And so I think that it's important to keep that in mind so that you don't ruin it for your kids. You've seen all these parents who are like pushing their kids all the time, and their kids, like maybe they just get sick of it and they quit, and then they don't, get all those benefits for their whole life. So it really also needs to be an enjoyable experience. It really is. It's great. And you should also, in general, especially as you get older, you shouldn't compare yourself to other people, right? Everyone's got different genetics. Everyone has a different story. Everyone has their own different capabilities. So you really need to measure yourself against yourself, right? And that's the way you can always continually reap rewards. Because let's say at some point in your life you get out of shape. Me, got out of the hospital, could barely walk up steps. You're not comparing yourself to a professional athlete at that point, or someone who's been lifting weights their whole life. You're comparing yourself a week from now with the person a week ago, right? And you're saying, oh, well, now I can walk up steps well. Now I don't get out of breath, or now I can lift more weight than I could 2 months ago. And it still might be nothing compared to people who do that professionally, or even people who are active who do it all the time. But compared to the version of you before, it's very impressive. And you can even notice that in your own life. And so that's also sort of a source of motivation and a source of, I guess, motivation is the word I'm looking for, or positive reinforcement of positive feeling in your life. It can be that, but it's important to not compare yourself with other people. Again, compare yourself to yourself. No, I think it should be something enjoyable that you enjoy and that your kids learn to enjoy. But also, I think if you want them to reach their maximum potential, there are specific things you can do, which I laid out here, which would let them reach their genetic maximum. And that was kind of my goal to outline with this sort of video, was just to say, okay, what would I do as a parent with my kids if I wanted to maximize their athletic potential?